Good evening and welcome to Real World News TV. My name is Shara Ann Tappan McCabe, and joining me this evening is Reginald Kearney. How are you this evening, Reggie?
I'm fine. How you doing?
I'm doing okay. I'm doing Tuesday. That's how I am.
Oh, okay. Okay. All right. You got 3 more days to go before the weekend is here.
Say it again. Say it again. So we have an interesting topic for tonight's show, and just to kind of break it down to its simplest description, we're going to talk about, Project 1619, critical race theory, and the attempts to whitewash history and opponents to both Project 1619 and critical race theory. What are your thoughts, Reggie?
Well, I hate to say it. You know, there are a group of whites in this country that just want to erase history. They don't want critical race theory or the 1619 project taught in the school systems. They want us to forget what happened, okay? They want us to forget what happened. And when you look at it, 1865 wasn't all that long ago, okay? So they act like, it's just something that happened 2,000, 3,000 years ago. No, this is recent history, okay?
Yeah.
And I think it's very important for us to teach our young people and some of the adults the real history around what we've been through, why we are where we are right now. And so
Yeah.
you have to have those pieces taught in schools in order to uh, move forward and to continue to say that these, especially with 1619 project, that it doesn't hold water or critical race theory is teaching racism. I mean, I got a problem with all that.
It boggles the mind. First of all, we know that history is typically taught from the viewpoint of the victor. And right now, predominantly that means great men, and in some instances, a
Mm,
few women that they've been willing to acknowledge in history books. And we tend to focus on those characters that seem heroic or tragic figures in sort of the global struggle for human freedom. And while on the one hand, you have the South and Southern minded leaning folks in the North
mhm.
who will gleefully celebrate their Southern heritage, who will reenact aspects of the Civil War and get dressed up in all of their Civil War regalia and whatnot.
Mhm.
Um, make concerted efforts to rewrite history from the perspective of the lost cause. As we know, the South has rebranded their reasonings for why they fought in the Civil War. We're taught to remember Pearl Harbor. We're taught to remember 9/11. We are begrudgingly taught a little bit about the Holocaust. It was a major world event and lots of countries were involved, so they can't help but teach that. But the minute you talk about the sins of this country with respect to slavery or the internment camps, the Japanese camps, and things of that nature, it's you're wallowing in the past. It doesn't exist anymore. That was then, this is now. I was like, well, if that's the case, take down your Confederate flag. If that's the case, stop having your antebellum parties. It's just mind-boggling to me. And it's not just they want us to forget, but it's a little more insidious than that because they're not just obliterating it from history books. They're completely rewriting it. We were workers, we weren't slaves. We were fed and housed, not given scraps and, a few pieces of cloths to wear. We weren't beaten. Those were just few instances. And it just screams of cowardice to me. And at the same time, you get people who are like, I'm not racist. I never owned a slave. Great, fine. I'm happy to hear it. But if that's the case, and you honestly believe that racism isn't a problem or that you're not guilty of microaggressions and acting in a racist manner or privileging from systemic racism as it exists in this country, then you should really have no problem talking about history and the founding of this country, which was built on our backs and the backs of other immigrants. Um, Predominantly African American slaves, of course, but other immigrants were negatively impacted as well. So on the one hand, they want to disassociate themselves from it by saying they're not guilty of it. But not only are they not guilty of it, but they refuse to acknowledge that, upwards of 60, 50 years ago, and even today, there are people who are guilty of it. So it's just extreme cowardice. And this evening, I posted an article from heritage.org written by a woman who was saying that the language of critical race theory poisons the discussion on race and race relations. And as I was reading that article, the one thought that came to mind was, here we have somebody who may think they're an ally, and they may think that they're making an intellectual argument, but really it was a pseudo-intellectual argument wrapped up around their sense of privilege, and that they get to dictate the language we use to talk about our experience, our history, and our present operating in this country, which still has its roots in racism, and we're still suffering from it, as we can see from the judicial system and the police force. Two prime examples: banking, redlining, housing, all of that. So I just thought this was written by Karen, who doesn't have the stomach to confront the realities of what's discussed in the 1619 Project or critical race theory, and thinks that she can use her privilege to dictate how we have this discussion and the language that we use when we have this discussion.
Okay, so when you look at, you were talking about celebrations that they do down south. I don't know if it's tomorrow. I know it's pretty soon. They're going to be celebrating Confederate Day in South Carolina, which is a paid holiday in South Carolina. Okay, so that's a bunch of BS. But when you look at one of the definitions of critical race theory, it says that critical race theory is an academic movement of civil rights scholars and activists in the United States who seek to critically examine the law as it intersects with issues of race and to challenge mainstream liberal approaches to racial justice. And we need to have that. When you sit and look at and when you look at the police here in America, look at how it affects us as blacks. Okay, how we can be, just happened a couple of days ago here in the DMV, where a Virginia trooper pulled a black lady over at it's probably around 1:30 in the morning, because her lights out, and I guess she, and she did the same thing. She saw the flashing lights, and she finally figured out that the trooper was trying to stop her, so she goes to a lighted area. Okay, he comes over there, I'm blah blah. Her windows roll down. He reaches in, unlocks the door, and yanks out the car. Okay, just yanks out the car. Doesn't tell her why he's yanking her out the car, what she has done wrong. And one of the things she said on the news tonight, if I'd been a white lady, they probably just told me, "Hey man, you need to turn your headlights on." They took her to jail. The officer charged her. He asked her when the last time she had a drink. It was about 2 hours prior, so probably around 11:30. She did a 0.0, no alcohol in her body, but he's charged her with obstruction of justice and one other thing. Okay, and Commonwealth attorney threw it out in court yesterday. Good. And they're going to do an investigation. But those are the type of things, because there's one set of rules and laws for whites, and there's another set of rules and laws for blacks, and the way we get treated. Okay, so it's very important that we have this discussion. But see, they don't want to have this discussion because they don't like people calling them racist. That's the whole thing. They don't want to be seen as racist. They want to be seen as our savior. They didn't save me. You go back and look at Django. You have everybody had one in the house that went along with whatever the slaveholder wanted. Okay, most of us didn't, but they want us to be happy and say, "Oh, we had a good time being slaves. We enjoyed getting what was left of an animal." Okay. That's why we eat chitlins. They wouldn't eat chitlins, and they gave those to us. Okay, it's just the things and the way they treated us, and they want us to forget.
And then make fun of what we eat now, when that's what we ate for generations.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very frustrating. I know that opponents try to gaslight and argue that there's a difference between historical fact and ideology. And, if we've learned anything over the last, I'd say, 8 years, it's this pathological ability of the right to take the things that they're guilty of and project it onto others. The very position that there's a difference between historical fact and ideology speaks more to the spin doctoring that they're doing and teaching history from the lost cause point of view than anything that Project 1619 is doing or critical race theory is doing.
Now, I'm sitting here, I came across this article that on FoxNews.com where Bessie DeVos blasts Randy Winningarten's defense of critical race theory 1619 project is not history, okay? How that, it ain't history, okay? That's when we were brought over, okay?
Yeah, well, keep in mind that this is the same news station that said tacos are American food, okay?
Yeah.
It doesn't surprise me.
DeVos, says, of course we need to teach history. We need to teach about slavery, she said, but we also need to teach how our country has continued to aspire for and work toward a more perfect union. And the answer to racism and discrimination in our country is not to then adopt another form of racism, which is exactly what the 1619 Project suggests. Okay, how in the heck can the 1619 Project suggest racism that we're, suggesting that we, throw racism out there and throw it out there loosely?
Well, this just makes it abundantly clear that these folks are using language they really don't understand. There's a difference between prejudice and prejudice and racism. We cannot be racist against white people or other people. We can be prejudiced, not that I support either position, but I mean, again, that just speaks to their own ignorance. And they don't like having a mirror pointed at them.
Yeah.
And I say again, if you are not racist and you do not benefit from the systemic racism that exists in this country, then you should have no problem having this discussion because it's history. You should have no problem having this discussion because you're separated from it. This was centuries ago. It's not your problem. But we do need to understand history so that we don't repeat it. We need to understand history so that the David Dukes who try to infiltrate the government and pass legislation that is contrary to democracy, that we can be mindful of that and recognize it when it's happening. But they don't care. And it's just evident that we're supposed to sit down and shut up. And the thing about that article that I read today was that it made me think of, the abuser doesn't get to dictate the language of the conversation. So let's say you have a mediation discussion with your rapist, for example. They don't get to say, well, we can have this discussion, but you can't use the word rape or abuse or beat. No, it doesn't work that way. And, and it amazes me that here we have a country that galvanized and promoted and sold postcards of our beaten bodies hanging from trees with bits and pieces missing under people having picnics. They sold these door to door. They were collector's items. And you're going to suggest that that has no impact then or now?
But see, to them, even though they were barbarics most of the time, the majority of the time, with from 1619, and in some cases, even today, they are barbarics. They don't see nothing wrong with what they did as far as having a picnic, having a lynching at a picnic, okay? They think it was fine. They put black people through pure hell and shit over the years, okay? That's just the bottom line. And it makes me mad that we can't have a civil conversation about the history, okay? If you look in the, my daughter's 24 now, and when she was in high school, just getting high school, in her history book, it was only like one page of black history in her history book. Nothing there. Okay, so we have to be the ones that force the issue and teach our kids this information. Even if you're in North Dakota, where the population, the percentage of blacks is very low, those white kids need to know about critical race theory, and they need to know about the 1619 Project. I don't care if you're Republican or Democrat, Independent or Green Party, you need to understand history. You cannot wash history underneath the rug, and that's what they're trying to do.
Well, in addition to that, and equally egregious, is that you don't see anything in the history books about our contribution to this country. Forget about our building the country and the infrastructure while we were enslaved, but all of the inventions that we've done. They have a vested interest in making it seem as though we are intellectually inferior and incapable of great feats and accomplishments.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they try to steal our accomplishments in Africa by linking Egypt with the Mediterranean and Greece and Rome. They deny the 12 empires that existed in Africa before they even came over from Greece and Rome and other places.
Mm-hmm.
It's impossible that we could have built the pyramids or come up with math or the Pythagorean theorem before the Greeks took it. You know, it's just, and I think that makes it easier by their ignorance and not understanding how we have significantly helped mold this country and things that we see every single day, from your stoplights to your computers to just everything. It is easier to dehumanize us and buy into the notion that we're only looking for free stuff. We had free stuff as slaves, and we want free stuff now. And it's easy for them to embrace that narrative because they are ignorant of the fact of our accomplishments.
We don't want free stuff. We just want to get paid the money they owe us, okay? For keeping our ancestors in slavery, okay?
Mm-hmm.
That's what we want, okay? You know, they had the Japanese internment camps here, excuse me, during World War II. And what did they do? They paid reparations to them, okay? We worked free. We came here in 1619 and we worked for free.
Mm-hmm.
Even after the Emancipation Proclamation, we continue to work free. Okay, we're just asking for them to give us what is owed to us. And, you know, it doesn't have.
Uh-oh, Tony, it looks like
it can be. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I lost you for a second.
Okay, let me see.
No, you're here. I got you now. Can you hear me?
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you.
But I can't hear you.
Tony, we might be having a little technical difficulty.
Like I was saying, and I'll fix this. They owe us, okay? They literally owe us, okay? And, you know, so they've got to make those adjustments for that and everything. Yeah. All right, Tony, why don't you come on for a minute? I think I had to get my headphones. My sound got knocked out.
Yeah. Yeah, I can hear Reggie, but he can't hear me.
Okay, so Reggie, you might have to go out and come back in.
Well, I'm going to get my headphones real quick. See if that helps.
All right, I'm going to bring your camera down. Okay, so I'm doing other things. Catch me up.
Mm-hmm. Well, obviously, we were talking about the opposition to the 1619 Project and critical race theory and the cowardice and inability and pathological refusal to acknowledge the facts of history in this country and the impact that slavery had and continues to have on our community, indirectly or directly. I think that about sums it up.
Both. Yeah. You caught me because I was on the phone.
No, you were working, you were hustling. I get it.
Oh my gosh. But yeah,
it's really interesting.
Yeah, it's very interesting. And I think that a lot of people don't want to see exactly what we're dealing with, because it takes them or forces them to look at where we come from, forces them to look at the history in a whole. And people are afraid of history
Yeah, well,
because then they have to they don't want to be held accountable.
they don't want to be held accountable, and they don't want to have that bubble burst, which suggests that part of the reason of their level of success in this country is in part because of the privilege that they've had. And what irks me is when people respond, I was raised in a hovel and we were poor and we ate the government cheese. I don't have privilege. I'm like, that is not what privilege is.
Right.
It doesn't mean you were born with a silver spoon in your mouth. It means that the police officer on the corner is not going to look to shove it up your ass repeatedly.
Exactly.
It means that you're not going to get pulled out of your car for not having your blinkers on and beat and arrested unjustly. It means that you don't have to worry about somebody looking at your name on your resume and wondering whether or not they're going to hire you or not because you have too ethnic a sounding name.
All of those, yes.
And more.
All of those.
So, but I guess it just speaks to, it says more about them on what privilege means to them.
But see, that's I think for me, when we're talking about recognizing what privilege is, when we look at white America, it's just a way of putting your head in the sand that those who don't or have not looked like you had been shunned, had been pushed aside, had been, like you guys were saying in the very beginning, when we look at slavery, they just don't want to look at it that way because they're then forced to recognize what had been going on for 400 years. And here we are going into 401. So they don't want to look at it because it forces them to take responsibility that, yes, there was a problem in this country and has been for age on end. It's going to make them say, yes, we were wrong.
And it's interesting. It's just the other day, somebody posted a comment online and I couldn't have even bothered. It was like, slavery's been over for hundreds of thousands of years. I was just like, what?
No. Like, that's telling you that we need to get over it.
It's not just the fact that you don't know our history as it relates to American history, but you don't know American history because we're not even hundreds of years old. 2 and change. Like I said, it forces people to recognize what this country has stood on and stood for. And people don't want to do that because there would be a level of shame, and it would force them to take that shame and force them to make changes that are necessary for us to be able to, I guess, catch up, to have our piece of the pie. Because hell, we built this country. It wasn't built on, the most prestigious ideas of how it was going to be done by labor. It was forced on us because we were thought of less than, but we were used in a way to build this country. We were just tools. And therefore not entitled to any of the recognition associated with getting us there.
Right.
And on the one hand, it's always all or nothing with this neo-right group. And on the one hand, yes, and we've said it on a number of shows, the shining hill, city on a hill, what this country potentially was meant to be and what it could be if you looked at the core of, the notion of liberty and justice for all and pursuit of happiness for all. If we take that and we separate it from, the racist foundations of this country, and we take the ideals that we claim we were founded on alone, we can be that shining city on a hill. But this pathological refusal and inability to acknowledge our contributions to this, both forced and voluntary, we won't be able to get there.
Well, we can't be that shining city on the hill, as you put it, until it's recognized that the shiny city on the hill will be sitting on the backs of slaves who have given their lives.
Yeah.
I mean, all across this land, you know, slaves were built. They were buried in unmarked graves, just as you know you're not supposed to build on sacred ground of American Indians.
Yeah.
You know, it's the same thing, but of course we lay under those grounds and it's not sacred.
Yeah.
It never will be.
Yeah.
So the city does not shine as bright as we think it's going to
no,
shine.
it's dull, rusted. On the one hand,
Right.
we've got the ideal of what we're supposed to be. And that's the image that we want to portray globally and nationally. And that's what we aspire to be. Hi, Lisa. And on the flip side of that coin is the dirty underbelly of everything that those in power historically in this country have done supposedly to get us there, when in fact it wasn't to get us there. It was just to build up and solidify their power.
Right.
But, in order to acknowledge the underbelly means that we have to acknowledge that this ideal may not necessarily be true. And the propaganda that we've been given since childhood about how great this country is and the opportunities that exist here, etc., it just confronts all kinds of realities that they're not ready to face. And we can't make that a reality until we can face these hard truths about the birth of this nation.
Right. I agree. So I'm going to let you guys get back to it, and I'm going away.
It's an article here in CNN that CNN did. It says lawmakers in Tennessee and Idaho have banned its teaching from the public schools curriculum, talking about the critical race theory, while parents in Texas are opposing the school district's efforts to combat racism with lessons in cultural awareness, seen by some as a critical race theory. It's a concept that's been around for decades that seeks to understand and address inequality and racism in the U.S. The term also has become politicized and been attacked by its critics as Marxist ideology that's a threat to the American way of life. So every time you want to do something, it's either communism or
socialist or Marxist. Yeah. Meanwhile, Russia's our bestie, and the Ukraine is good. It's like we have totally flipped. What used to be bad and our enemy is now good, and what's good and just and would lead us to a more just society is bad. Talking about racism or anti-racism is considered unpatriotic. That should be seen as a problem. It boggles my mind that we have elected officials campaigning on this platform of anti-racism.
Well, when you look at it, it's a last ditch effort of the white community, for some in the white community to make attempts at being relevant, okay? Because they know they're dwelling into a minority population. So anything to keep them ahead of the game, that's what they're going to work towards. If it means striking down certain things that need to be taught in school, then that's what it need. That's what they're going to do. They're trying to survive. They're trying to survive, and it's sad that they don't want to discuss anything, and not taking, when you look at the treatment of blacks in this country, not taking nothing off of what Asians are going through right now as far as hatred of people in the Asian community. They passed a bill, Asian bill to, for hate crimes and stuff, but they have never done an anti-black hate bill. It seems like everybody gets to the front of the line except for us. They act like we came over here with Christopher Columbus and, we built this country and we just enjoyed all the spoils and that went along with being citizens in this country. When you look at the 3/5, I guess, can't even think of what it's called, but the bill that gave us looked at us as 3/5 of a
It was
human.
a
Okay,
three-fifths clause, yeah.
yeah, in the Constitution to make sure that the southern states had enough votes to keep things moving along. That's how they looked at it. And when I was listening to a program the other day concerning that, it really teed me off that, and when you really think hard about it, we were just animals to them. But the white slave owner didn't have no problem going and raping our women.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't have a problem with that.
That's a whole nother subject. I can't even. It's just, how do you argue against people who do nothing more than gaslight and lie?
Call them ignorant.
You know,
Because they are. They're ignorant. You just that that guy who was in the White House just gave the people the gasoline to pour on the fire. Okay, and that's what he did. So now anything that we do or we decide we want is something that they're not willing to go along with.
meanwhile, we're the bad guys, and the
Yeah.
leftist is evil. And, I'm like, it's, you want to talk about it being impossible to have a conversation. The article that I read had a problem with the use of terms like systemic racism and white privilege, which are realities. And yet you're arguing with people who are using talking points from the Lost Cause, which totally rewrites history about the Civil War, and refuses to acknowledge that systemic racism is a thing, refuses to acknowledge that even though the FBI released multiple reports saying that white supremacists have infiltrated police departments nationwide and that is a serious problem, refuse to acknowledge that racism exists within the judicial system or in the municipalities and the police departments. So, any claim that they want to have an actual, honest, intellectual conversation is false when they're trying to cut your knees out from under you from the get-go by trying to limit the language that you're using to have this discussion. They don't, like, Jim Crow happened. Those laws happened. That's not revisionist history. That's not propaganda. It happened. Wanted postcards and people being kidnapped across state lines happened. Uh, and for them to talk about it and diminish it and call it propaganda is really disgusting. And there's just no other words for it.
That's what they want to see is propaganda. They don't want to. They don't want to take time out to sit down and have a meeting of the minds to understand the way we feel. You know, they act like we're supposed to be happy. Like I said, 1865 hasn't even been 200 years yet.
Please, it just keeps making me think of an abusive relationship with a narcissist. Right? No one's gonna love you more than I do. Right? No one is gonna do, huh?
We did have a relationship with a narcissist.
Well, no, I mean on a more national scale. No one's going to love you more, do more for you than we have. The American has done so much for Black people. The devil you know is better than the devil you don't know. It's just and convincing you to stay in a toxic relationship rather than seek help or get the help the other individual so desperately needs.
156 years. Since 1865.
3 generations.
Civil rights and the right to vote, 1964 and 1965.
1 generation ago.
Okay.
Yeah.
And we supposed to be happy. We supposed to be, yes, sir. Oh, we happy now.
Yeah. Well, don't you remember? These people think that was thousands of years ago. So it doesn't matter. We should be over it now.
It wasn't. You can't. They just don't understand. You cannot get over something that was as brutal as slavery and as brutal as lynchings were. You can tell you in New York City.
My window's open. I'm sorry. For once, it's not hot.
Probably some little old lady trying to walk across the street, they're gonna run her over. But
oh, shush!
You cannot expect us to be happy. We haven't had anything to be happy about. Okay. police brutality continues on, okay? Every year we have the conversation about reform of the police department. Colin Kaepernick has a book coming out talking about abolishing the prisons and abolishing the police department, things of that nature. I'm gonna buy that book. I want to read to it and see what his insight is on that. But if you look at all the institutions that are here, the prison system and the police departments, they are really here not to help us as Black people. You know, they're here to keep us down.
Well, I mean, that was never more evident than when they allowed prisons for profits to start, because you've incentivized criminalizing normal behavior or moderately annoying behavior so that municipalities can make money off of it. And, you know, if they were genuinely concerned about crime in this country, regardless of the race that it's born from, if you were genuinely interested in crime in this country, you would fix the educational system. You would teach people better trades. You'd prepare them for the future so that we could compete on a global scale. And you would invest in the prison system such that these people could be educated and have hope for some kind of opportunity when they get out. But no, they have a vested interest in recidivism. Period.
Yeah. The Russians don't have any real strong manufacturing in their country other than military equipment. So they don't have a lot of opportunities for their people. Excuse me. But they sure know how to hack a computer. Okay.
What else are they going to do with their time?
Yeah. Here we are now, here in the United States, which is supposed to be one of the smartest countries in the world, but you can't, because we're probably about number 10 on the scale on the you know, in the rankings now. But
that's very optimistic.
Yeah, we around here fighting for gasoline right now. Because the dark side has infiltrated, you know, has hacked into the computer system for one of the largest gasoline oil distributors on the East Coast, and with ransomware, and then they're looking for money, and God knows how much money they want.
Well, you know, what's interesting is, in light of everything that happened over the last 4 years between Trump's administration and Russia and what happened in the Ukraine, you know, I need more information before I blame Russian hackers, because we've already seen so many people in Trump's administration who are willing to do underhanded shit
with the Russians,
with them and with others.
Yeah,
you know, I think it's very easy to make another group, you know, the boogeyman in this instance.
Yeah.
You know, whether it's Russia or Black people or whatever, when it's really the power brokers in DC who are nurturing and instigating and starting this shit. For all we know, they could have been like, hey, do this, because we don't. Remember, they were like, gas prices are going to be impacted under Biden. What better way to make that true than this? So I would like to see a little more investigation before I point fingers. And you're right, Kevin, I have not been to Russia. I have been to Sweden, which I loved, you know, but
they are very strong, Kevin, when it comes to hacking. You know, they are great with hacking. And you tell these corporations and you tell others that they have to improve their firewalls. But these companies and corporations never listen. You know, here in Washington, D.C., the police department got hacked. And they ransomware again. They have put out 500 pages of information on just a handful of police officers and informants on the dark web. You know, so those are things we've got to go through here in this country, along with everything else we've got to go through. You know.
Oh, so Kevin says that they actually do have a strong manufacturing base. I'd be interested in knowing what they manufacture. But again, all of this is not to be a attack on Russia or a testament about Russia, but about what's going on in this country, which is nonsense.
Yeah. You know, but they are known to do well in the area of manufacturing, you know, military equipment. I mean, they have that. You know, they're very strong at that. You know, they do have to manufacture a lot of their own stuff in the country because they don't purchase nothing from us. Like I said, when it comes into cyber warfare, I mean, they're experts at it. And my thing is, I'm afraid of is that what's going to happen. That one morning we're going to wake up and try to go to the bathroom and try to turn the lights on, and there's the grid, the electric grid has been knocked off by a Russian.
Look, I would sooner expect nationalists in this country to do that than a Russian operative. Because the nationalists in this country and the Bundys of this country and the would-be so-called sovereign citizens of this country have made it very clear that they would love nothing more than to dismantle the government as it is and remake it in their image, if you will. So I don't even like waxing on about that because, quite frankly, I don't think that our systems are that secure to begin with. And, when I think about the bridges of New York, all it would take is to take out 2 or 3 bridges in New York. We'd be landlocked or screwed. People who live on Manhattan proper. And it doesn't seem like a difficult thing. They're not bomb sniffing dogs on cars going into the tunnel and the bridges. But honestly, look, this is going into a whole nother realm of conversation. But white nationalists have made it very clear that they're anti-government. White nationalists have made it very clear that they're in the military. They have made it their business to buy military-grade weapons. They are the ones who bought bombs and pipe bombs to the insurrection on January 6th. So, no, I'm not buying the Antifa will be the one responsible for destroying the government. It will come from white nationalists.
But you know something? America is so hard on Black Americans, okay? Some in the white community, okay? Now, if we were being propped up in our communities, which do need to be propped up because we have a lot of issues with, economic conditions and things of that nature in our communities and inner cities and things like that. Now, if we develop a relationship with China or somebody like that who's willing to give us the money that we need, holy hell will break out because of that partnership, okay? But then when you try to make partnerships here in this country, they don't want to do that. Okay? They don't want to do that. But if we reached on the outside for people who are willing to help us in our communities, like I said, all hell will break out. It would be nice.
It would be nice if the mega churches that are making millions of dollars tithing their populations would reinvest in the communities that support them. And for the record, I've lived in New York all my life, and I drive through the Holland Tunnel every single day and do not see bomb sniffing dogs down there. So while I don't discount your 3 years of experience, I have an entire lifetime of experience in New York, Kevin. So I know what I'm talking about.
Those are things I look at and see, that, hey, we are still considered at the bottom of the barrel when it comes to true citizenship, even though we've made major strides here in this country. Okay, I can't take away the accomplishments we've had as Black Americans, but we still are not at the table like we need to be at the table. Okay, and people, they're doing a lot to try to keep us from the table. And so when it comes down to, the critical race theory needs to be taught. Okay, the kids need to understand the conditions of this country right now, and what the conditions have been, and what the conditions could be in the future if things don't improve. Okay, and there's nothing wrong with teaching the truth, but for a lot of people, truth doesn't matter.
Oh, that's a whole nother subject. I mean, everything is spun from allegories in the Bible to politics and history. Everything is spun to maintain a narrative that makes these folks feel comfortable.
And our vote, now I was going to say too, not to cut you off, and our vote is something that they just don't want us to have. They don't want us to vote.
Yeah.
You know, they don't want us to vote. The governor in Arizona, I believe, just signed a bill to scrub 140,000 names from the
Voting
voting program.
register.
Yeah. Well, not from the voting register, but from the automatic ballot request registry. They have a register where you automatically get your ballots in the mail. Now, this was a state that was under federal mandate that before they could do anything, they had to get permission from the Justice Department so they could do anything with their voting and stuff.
It's amazing to me that in a country that likes to declare itself the bastion of democracy, that its elected officials are bending over backwards to do everything it can to negatively impact people's ability to vote. Absolutely nothing that they've done recently secures the vote. I mean, it's been shown time and time again that the amount of fraudulent voting is below 1%, so much so as to be negligent and have little to no effect on local or state or federal elections. And rather than working to ensure that more people have a voice, that more people can have their votes counted, they're bending over backwards to make it nearly impossible for people from multiple walks of life. Because it's not, I mean, while our community may be the most directly impacted, the elderly are being impacted. People who live far from DMVs and polling places are being impacted. It's ridiculous. And, you know, in a world or in a country that has focused so much of its efforts on defining the races and limiting what people can or cannot do based on how much of one type of blood they have in them or another, I find it really fallacious to take the argument that the problem with critical race theory is that it insists you see all human interactions as power struggles between races, when that is what it has been in this country since its inception. Power struggle. I mean, first of all, I have an issue with the notion of race to begin with. There's only one race, it's the human race. And thanks to some German or some other scientist, I forget who it was, who decided there's the Mongoloid, the Negroid, the Caucasian, and all of that other bullshit. I think that helped make a racist narrative easier. Mm-hmm. But it is not divisive to talk about racism, and it is not divisive to talk about the different impacts that people have had, whether being benefiting from it or being harmed by it. And so when people make statements like Kevin just made, the downfall of critical race theory is that it insists you see all human interactions as a power struggle between races, that's more divisive than unifying, is another example of, to me, of somebody once again trying to dictate to us how we have a conversation about what impacts us.
Yeah.
I'm sorry if you feel uncomfortable, Kevin, but this is a conversation that needs to be had. And you don't get to dictate the language that is used to have that conversation.
Now, you know, but one thing Kevin has got to understand, okay? And I'm not trying to bash Kevin or nothing like that, but Kevin, you have not walked in my shoes, okay? I'm 63 years old. I've seen a lot more. I don't know how old you are, Kevin, but I've seen a lot more in life than what you have seen. You know, I came up through the civil rights movement. I came up during a time in the South when my father was getting threatened for going out and trying to help people vote and signing people up to vote and everything. You know, I've seen it all happen, okay? I had a cousin in 1957 in Martin County, North Carolina, that was lynched, okay, castrated, okay, when he was lynched. Okay, I've been through it, okay? I've been on the other side of it. I had two cousins that were executed in Virginia in the 80s, okay? Did they deserve it? I don't know. I mean, they did some horrible crimes, but I've been on both sides of the fence, okay? We need to have a discussion about race in this country, okay? This country is way beyond being perfect, okay? Now.
And I'm sorry, melanin is not an answer that proves races exist. So that's all I'm going to say about that comment. And you're right. When we are talking about you and your, we are talking about those people who have a vested interest in maintaining the system as it is, and a pathological inability to acknowledge that there is systemic racism in this country and that there are problems that need to be addressed. So if you feel like when we use the plural you, you're included in that, then I think that you need to ask yourself some questions about why you are triggered in having that reaction. Otherwise, I don't know you from a hole in a wall.
Yeah, and you know, I'm looking at another comment that Kevin had made. You know, okay, Dr. Kendi and Coleman Hughes, they have have different views on this subject. Okay, one is conservative, very conservative. Coleman Hughes is very conservative. Okay, and Dr. Kendall is very liberal. Okay, their views are different. Okay, they are different. They have different reasons for wanting what they want. Okay. I mean, I think, and I got to read his article. Coleman Hughes just did an article on Black Lives Matter. Does it really, you know, in a sense, asking the question, does it really matter to the community? Okay. Does it harm the community? Okay. You know, what Kevin has to understand, there is still a this country still has a long ways to go to being a perfect union. And I don't know if I'm going to see it in my lifetime, but I'm going to fight before I leave here to make sure that my grandchildren and hopefully their children would be able to see that.
Yeah. And look, just because somebody invites you to have a discussion does not mean that you are honor bound and required to give it to them. If he feels that that discussion, if Coleman Hughes is perfectly within his rights to have that debate or not.
Yeah.
At this point, if he already knows what Dr. Kendi would say and disagrees with him, he is within his rights to decide whether or not he wants to waste his time arguing with somebody who he believes is wrong. This sense of entitlement that people have, I disagree with you, you must debate with me. We see it online every day, particularly over the last 8 years. And I got to a point about 2 years ago and I said, you know what? If after this point you don't see something, and you can't acknowledge on any stretch of the imagination that this is a problem, then debate and discussion is pointless. And I choose to use my time more productively for me than to argue with somebody who is freebasing a narrative that I will never be able to change.
Yeah.
So I'm glad that you joined the show, Kevin, and that you participated in this discussion. But just because Coleman Hughes hasn't accepted the invitation does not by default mean that he would be out-debated. It just probably means that he is exhausted and tired of making the same argument repeatedly to people who have a pathological inability to acknowledge the facts of it.
And because, like I said, Kevin, I appreciate you being on here too, because I would debate Coleman Hughes any day, any place. Okay, we can sit down at dinner in New York sometimes when I'm in New York. Him and I can have a beer and discuss this. You know, I've got real world experiences in what has happened in this country. Okay, like I said, we said earlier, Kevin, 1964 and 1965, the Voting Rights Act and the Civil Rights Act, just a couple of days ago. Okay, you know, we haven't gone through a whole century and a whole cycle. Okay, this country is running backwards.
So I would ask Kevin a question here. Do you believe that systemic racism exists? Do you believe that there's a problem right now with white nationalists in the police force? And do you believe that there are problems in this country that need to be addressed as specifically relates to race relations and the notion of white supremacy?
And also, Kevin, nobody was making excuses for Dr. Kendi. You know, like Cheryl just said, both individuals might feel like it might be a waste of time for either one of them to voice their views when both of them have opposing views. Okay? You know, so nobody's saying that. But like I said, Kevin, you haven't walked in my shoes, okay? And if you can tell me the times you walked in my shoes and what I've been through in life, man, you know, you and I can be friends. But you can't talk to me about such a racism and things of that nature that I've been through and that I've seen and that I still see.
And it begs the question to me, and it's a genuine question, I'm not being facetious, but as somebody Now, I may be making an assumption here, but I'm assuming that you're not a person of color, and I could be wrong, and you can correct me. But if that assumption is correct, and you've never been subject to systematic racism, from what position of authority do you speak from when you say that there is no such thing as systematic racism in this country? It boggles the mind. That's like a man saying to me, there's no such thing as rape. And there are men in this country who believe that, strangely enough. And having never been subject to sexual harassment or rape, what do they base that opinion on? No, I acknowledge that I don't know what you are, Kevin. You are free to indicate what you are or not. But looking at the back of your head and your picture on your Facebook page, you don't appear to be a person of color, but I could be wrong. So feel free to answer that question or not.
But what I want to know from Kevin, and Kevin, if you want to, you can answer this very quickly. You know, what is the problem you have with teaching critical race theory and the 1619 project? You know, what are the problems with it and showing what this country has really been like and what, in a sense, this country is still like? Okay, there's nothing wrong with teaching our kids that, and hopefully through the teachers, that the next generation will see less color, that they can move beyond racism. You know, that's my hope. But you've got to start somewhere and teach about these issues and problems, okay? So, Tony, it's 9:31. You can come on in and tell us what you're going to do tomorrow night. You know.
To get in. Kevin, you're an interesting soul, my dear heart.
You're very kind, Tony.
Yeah, okay, and let me say one more thing. Kevin, critical race theory creates open racism against people and doesn't get rid of it. Kevin, okay, I assume you're a white guy, okay? I don't know you. But just because I don't know you doesn't mean I consider you a racist, okay? All right? That's what you're talking about. You know, we're not trying to create racism in this country. We're trying to get rid of it, and we need to teach about it and teach the kids what to look for and where it's at, okay? Hell, I love this country just as much as you do, but I can't deal with liberty and justice for all because there's not liberty and justice for everyone in this country.
Facts.
Yep. So I'm gonna leave Kevin alone because I ain't gonna get my blood pressure up. So
thank you for joining us this evening, Kevin.
Thank you, Kevin. So great show. Loved it. So for everyone who has been tuned in tonight to Real World News TV, you can always come back here every Tuesday night. The show always starts at 5:30 p.m. Pacific. 7:30 Central, 8:30 on the East Coast. Make sure that you follow Real World News TV on Facebook so that you can get updates throughout the day and you'll know what the next shows are. Try not to pay attention to his comments while I'm doing this. So tomorrow night, we've got a great show lined up for you on Hot Topics Talk Radio TV with me and Yvonne Baker. The show starts at 7 o'clock p.m. Pacific, 9 Central, 10 on the East Coast. Tomorrow, we are going to be tackling the issues of sabotaging your own relationships. You know, we've done this about 3 years ago, and we are revisiting the topic because it was greatly successful, you know, when we did that show. So again, you can join us tomorrow night on Hot Topics Talk Radio TV with me and Yvonne Baker. The show starts at 7 o'clock p.m. Pacific, 10 Eastern. Let's see. I will listen to him. I don't have a problem with listening to both sides. Oh, that was you. I was like, Kevin is having a change of heart.
You know, I can listen to both sides and still make a good judgment. I know what this country needs and what's the desired outcome.
Right? Yeah. Oh my gosh. Great job, you guys. Great job. So with that being said, again, we thank you for tuning in to Real World News TV. Come back and join them next week on Tuesday And it is great to have you watching in and supporting what we do. And we thank you from the bottom of our hearts. Okay, Kevin. Anyway.
I tell you, you got to love Kevin, boy. I tell you.
Yeah, yeah, you can love him.
Oh, Kevin.
You can love him. So anyway, we will see you guys back here on Real World News TV next week on Tuesday. And I am Yvonne Baker. We'll see you tomorrow night on Hot Topics Talk Radio TV. Have a wonderful rest of your night, everybody.
Good night.
Be safe out
Good night,
there.
Kevin.
Good
night, Kevin.
Nice having you, Kevin.
See you next week.